Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. My favorite part of this story is I can have 2 lawyers here within the hour. The ultimate screw you. Thank you for making my day so much better, OP. Here we go. Heavy metal finance. Quite a few years ago now, in the late 1990s and very early on in my career, I used to work for a company that helped customers of certain retail stores manage their finances. My role was as a sort of compliance officer, ensuring that the staff who dealt with customers were following the rules. If they messed it up, it was a big problem and could potentially impact the customer's credit score, result in them defaulting on payments, and even end up in court. I took my job pretty seriously. The company was not particularly well run from a management perspective. They'd made a lot of money very quickly and had grown from a handful of people in a garage to a 4-story office building in the CBD within the space of a year and a half. There wasn't a great deal in the way of policy or process framework, so I had to develop a lot of the tools to do my job myself. This involved some programming, a basic system to track what I was doing, linked to the extensive rule set, and automate some of the more tedious reporting. It would also track how long I was spending on each task so that I could see about which elements I could streamline. Now, I was quite proud of this system and called it Hendrix, as I'm a massive Jimi Hendrix fan, and it used to play about 5 seconds of the instrumental version of Little Wing when it started up. As I had my own little room, cupboard, this never used to annoy anyone. I can geek out about that type of stuff. At this point, before corporate IT became rather more rigid, I used to write a lot of my own tools. I was the only person who was using Hendrix, and it was a tool just for me. My manager, the archetypal middle manager, decided that because it allowed you to quickly reference which rules applied to which situation, it should be rolled out to all staff. Now, I had previously considered this, but I argued that I couldn't guarantee that it would be fit for task because I designed it for my own use, and I'd need to make some changes first, but he rolled it out anyway without me even getting a chance to tweak it. He got a Team Player of the Week award for introducing a tool to make life easier for frontline staff. In his acceptance speech, this was a big rah-rah thing each week for the company, he thanked his manager. I didn't even get a mention. Then, 2 weeks later, I realized that I'd been recording how long I'd been working on certain tasks within the program. Now, I'd realized fairly quickly that this part of the program was a little too detailed, and I didn't really care too much about every single task within each incident, so I just used it to record how long I spent on the entire incident rather than each part of the incident. My manager invited me to a meeting about Hendrix, no details given, and I attended thinking it was going to be a list of requested features, only to find out that the head of HR was there and I was being given a written warning for falsifying timekeeping. Because each customer interaction was a certain length, my manager had decided that this was what I should be recording, and not how long I was spending listening to, analyzing, checking, and reporting on the interaction. Remember, this is a tool that I had designed for my own use, and it was not being used to calculate how much I was being paid or whether I was doing enough work during the day or not. There was nothing in place for that at all. I had not made the records public. He'd found them in a file on the server that he and I had access to. Nobody else was even supposed to have this tool. I argued this and was told that it wasn't up to me and I was getting a warning regardless. It got really quite heated and unpleasant, though I got the impression that the head of HR was a little embarrassed about the whole thing. They said, however, that if I wanted to consult a lawyer, I was quite within my rights to do so. It was at this point that I was rather smugly able to state that I could get 2 lawyers there within the hour, as both my parents were practicing and my mother was, in point of fact, an employment lawyer. I realize that this is a bit of deus ex machina, but it only has partial bearing on the story. Suddenly, there was a completely different attitude from my manager. There was an attempt to roll back the issue and turn it into a suggestion that perhaps I should be a bit more careful with my timekeeping in the future. But I was pretty angry at this point. I pointed out that my software had been rolled out to all staff against my wishes. I was told that this wasn't up to me as it was company intellectual property, until I advised them that I'd written it in my own time, at home on my own computer. It was plugging into the official government rule set, not the corporate intranet one. I had not confirmed it fit for general release at all. I had received special dispensation from IT to install it on a single work computer, mine, and I would require them to pay a license fee for anything beyond this. To be fair, this would have been tied up in court for a long time, and I've got no idea whether I'd have been successful, so in the end I relented. If they wanted to use Hendrix, well, I guess they could. I just made sure that little wing would play for 1 second longer on startup for every week the software was in use. Then I quit the following Monday and was working for another company by the Monday after that. 3 or 4 months later, I got a phone call from my former manager asking me to come fix the problems with my software. He hung up when I quoted him my consultant fees. I don't know why IT weren't able to figure it out. It was just a setting in a text file, not at all hard to find. A friend who remained in the company tells me they continued to use Hendrix for a whole year. The mornings in the call center were apparently horrifying, with Little Wing playing for around a minute every time someone started a new shift. Sometimes it would play on 20 computers at once, few seconds apart, on tinny PC speakers that were unable, due to IT, to mute. And our second story. Woman wasn't expecting she would be having a riding buddy. This story takes place in the Czech Republic, where many people are often really grumpy. My girlfriend, 25, and I, 21, were waiting for a bus ride to go to her hometown for a wedding. As you'd expect, we had 3 bags, and they were packed to the point where zipping the bag required you to sit on it, especially her bag, as she was one of the bridesmaids. Before we boarded the bus, we had to wait for the passengers who had paid beforehand to reserve seats. My girlfriend and I had not prepaid. We were in somewhat of a line, which allowed for the passengers who reserved seats to pass. The line for unreserved seat passengers was essentially respected, except by this woman. She arrived when the line was somewhat being formed and decided to stand next to us. As our turn to board was coming up, she quickly scooted in front of my girlfriend and looked forward as if she was completely oblivious to the fact she'd done something that was traditionally frowned upon. My girlfriend was obviously quite annoyed and started saying out loud, in English, much of the older generation in this country doesn't understand English very well, "Well, that's a B-word thing to do. Can you believe this woman?" I was calm as I'd counted how many people had already boarded the bus, and there was still a good chance we'd find seats together in the unreserved rows, so I didn't think it called for any type of confrontation. Still, I'd calmly responded, "Let's be honest, we can't be surprised when B-words do B-word things." Looking back, it was unnecessary, but I was also tired and the bags were heavy, so I was a bit impatient. We finally sit down, and my girlfriend chose to sit in the 2 free seats behind her. I would have chosen the seats in front of her and then just slowly reclined my seat back every few minutes so that she wouldn't have noticed my little act of revenge, but this ended up being better. It's important to note that the row the woman chose was the last row with an overhead shelf for bags. The shelf was a little longer in the front, so every person essentially had space for their bag if they moved their bags a little towards the front of the bus. It's also important to mention that the shelf was essentially empty, and I could have placed another 5 bags next to ours if I wanted to. We finally hit the road, and the woman is talking on the phone, loudly I might add, saying how she's going to visit her grandson, who's so sweet, but that he plays metal music in his room and she can't stand the sound of it. After she finishes the call, she takes off her windbreaker and plans to put it above her seat. She finally sees that my bag is directly above her seat, and instead of moving her jacket 35 centimeters to the right on the shelf or setting her jacket on the empty seat beside her, she decides to confront me in an entitled tone. "Excuse me, young man, but I can't put my jacket anywhere because your fat bag is in the way." I was bored, so I decided to act like this was a tragedy. "Oh no, what will we do? Maybe if we put our heads together, we can find a solution." Her face turned from shock to old communist grandma rage. She yelled back, "Well, don't you know that the shelf space is for the person directly below the seat?" "Oh, I'm so sorry. I truly didn't know that was like an unspoken rule. So the space above your seat is only for you and the potential passenger next to you?" I say, truly acting sorry and embarrassed. Yes, it is. So please move it to your spot," she says, acting victorious. "Of course, right away." I quickly get up and take my girlfriend's bag off the shelf and place it on the seat where I was sitting next to her. I keep my bag in the exact same spot and plop myself down next to the old woman with a grin. The look on her face was absolutely priceless, as she was trying to understand what just happened. I smile at her, take my headphones out, and play some death metal way too loud so that she can definitely hear it. I might have hearing loss. I don't even like death metal, but it was definitely worth it knowing she was annoyed the whole time. My girlfriend was sad I didn't sit next to her for the bus ride, but she ultimately agreed it was the best way to get back at her. And our last story. HOA Karen won't stop stealing my electricity for $40,000. Some 20 to 30 years back, times were entirely different. Neighbors trusted one another. I recall we didn't even lock our door at night, so trusting we were of our neighbors. We would also leave gardening tools outside without fear. My grandmother lives in a housing cooperative, and it always seemed to me that people willing to abide by such strict rules, some even downright foolish, would be more respectful towards others' property. But it turned out entirely the opposite. Houses in this area are quite close to one another, and once, when visiting my grandmother, I noticed that her electricity bill was about 3 times higher than mine. My grandfather has long passed, and my grandmother lives alone. She physically couldn't consume more electricity than a whole family of 5. I started checking everything and got to the bottom of the electricity bill issue. This kind of bill had been coming for 3 years already. At first, I thought someone at the electric company decided to scam the old lady and asked my lawyer to send an inquiry to them, but everything there was in order. I hired an electrician to see what happened and to sort out the problem, and almost immediately he found a cable buried that had been clumsily drilled into my grandmother's electric meter and somehow soldered there. Turns out that my granny's neighbor from the housing cooperative was not only crazy in appearance, but truly deranged. Also, when I used to come to my grandmother's earlier, I noticed that the neighbor was welding something in his garage and his backyard was filled with odd metal sculptures. I don't know how a real fight didn't break out in the cooperative over these sculptures, but probably they don't care about the backyard. And this guy and his wife owned 2 Teslas. Apparently, they decided that fueling the electric cars would be even cheaper if instead my grandmother would foot the bill. In total, over 3 years, my grandmother received about $40,000 in electricity bills, maybe even more. And that's just what I managed to calculate. When I confronted Karen, she screamed that she had nothing to do with this strange cable going to her house and that I should shake myself off or she'd call the cops. At night, they tried to cut the cable and hide everything. Good thing I took photos of everything beforehand. When I called the police, Karen shouted that my grandmother was too rich and greedy and that she hadn't noticed all this before, so it must not matter to her. I took Karen to court, and it turned out that their house and the 2 Teslas were on credit, and now to pay my grandmother's compensation, they had to lose the house and one of the Teslas. I hope they'll take those ridiculous sculptures with them when they move away from here. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.